What is up? Welcome back. If you guys haven't been following along, I've got two videos out now about bait casters. The first one was about how to set up a bait caster straight out of the box. The second one was about how to select the right size reel for your technique that you're using. So now I want to talk about gear ratio. And I know that there's a big debate on each gear ratio per technique, and some people say you need this and other people say you need that. I'm going to be completely honest with you guys, tell you exactly the gear ratios that I use and why I use them. You can take it as it is, form your own opinion, but this is going to be a video on what I think and what I have found to work. So without further ado, let's get to it. So to start off, if you're just looking for one gear ratio to get, maybe you're in the market of getting your first bait caster, get something, I would say, in the 7:1 ratio. That's right there in the middle. You're going to be able to do majority of everything efficiently. I would say that'd be your first purchase. Now, once you start building your arsenal up, there are better gear ratios for certain techniques. Now, we'll start, it's such a big span of techniques now and gear ratios, it can get super confusing. But most of mine, there's only 3 gear ratios. I've got a mid 6:1, 7:1, and 8:1. And that's just been the easiest for me, breaking it down that way instead of trying to get some 5s or even up to 8s, and I'm sure that they've got some that are higher than that now. The way I look at it as picking my gear selection is, how fast do I need to move that bait, and how fast do I need to move that bait? Do I need to pick up line fast? And how much power do I need to get that fish back to the boat? Like, is that fish in heavy cover, or am I fishing a larger than normal bait, then I need a little bit more power? Something like that. So to break it down is, if you think like a car, like a race car, the higher the gear, the lower the low end torque that car is going to have, because that car is geared up in a high gear. That's all it's meant to do, go fast. And if you've been around race cars or NASCAR or anything like that, those cars from a dead stop take a while to actually get going. And gear ratios in a reel are the same way. The higher you go up, like an 8-something, like an 8.2 or a 9-something to 1, that's a super fast gear ratio, but it's going to take just a little bit more power to actually get that reel going. So on my frogs or flipping, like if you're punching mats, stuff like that, I tend to stick to either a low 7:1 or even a mid 6 to high 6:1. And I know a lot of people are going to say that that's stupid because you want a faster gear ratio to make more casts. I understand that. But I would rather give up a few casts to have more power when I get a bite. Because I've done it. I have frogged in the heaviest of cover with an 8.2:1. And when you make a bomb cast and you get a bite and you need to get that fish up out of the mat, that 8:1 doesn't have the power that a 6.8:1 would have, or a 7.2:1 would have. So for me, I would rather sacrifice a little bit of speed for more power in that situation. The only other thing I'm going to use a super high gear ratio, like an 8-something to 1, is if you're fishing top waters and open water, that you have no cover, that you don't have to worry about fighting those fish. Maybe you're out over a hump fishing schooling fish, and you need to be able to make, cast really quickly, reel up your bait real quick, and throw it another school, stuff like that. If I don't have to worry about cover, I say go for it. Get the highest gear ratio you can get, absolutely. Now, low gear ratio, like your 5s and 6 to 1s, I like to use those, of course, for cranking, because most of the time I'm not burning a crankbait. Now, there are times that they want a crankbait burned as fast as they can go. And if I run into that, I will bump up to a 7 or a mid 7s to 1, something like that. But 80% of the time, I'm cranking on a mid 6 to 1 gear ratio. Like I said before, I'll even fish jigs with it if I'm not making long casts. If I'm just pitching, I'll use a lower gear ratio just because I've got more power. Everything else, I'm going to throw a 7. Most of these, I believe, are a 7-2 to 1. If I believe that's right. Yes. I think these are a 7-2 to 1. That's personally my favorite because with a 7-2, I can slow down to fish more like a 6 something to 1, or I can even speed up to like an 8 to 1. And if I see that I'm always reeling a lot faster with whatever bait that is, I'll go to an 8 something to 1. But that's where it gets really, really confusing, and this is something else that you've got to play around with. But this is just the techniques that I use. The 7-2s to me are perfect for just about everything in the middle. If I'm having to deal with just a little bit of cover, you're fine. You've got plenty of power. If I'm throwing chatterbaits or even swim baits at times, I'll throw on a 7-2 to 1, and it works just fine. I know I'm getting off on a little bit of a tangent here, and I hope you guys understand that gear ratios are really, they're hard to pinpoint down because there are so many techniques and so many situations that two gear ratios might work for one bait, and it just is what it is, and you just pick whichever one and roll with it. But if you guys are struggling on picking which gear ratio to get for, like if you're setting up a chatterbait setup and you're like, I don't know which one to get, throw it on whatever gear ratio you've got. Then if you, for that given day, or if you're practicing for a tournament and you see that, hey, I'm having to really creep this bait on the bottom, like chatterbait or a spinnerbait or something like that. If I'm really having to just slow wind that bait all the time, bump down to a lower gear ratio to fish that bait. But then you might go a week later and they want that bait burned all the time. Then bump right back up to your middle, a 7 something or a little bit higher gear ratio. This is something that's constantly changing, and you have to figure out on a given day how they want a certain bait. Buzz baits are the same. Sometimes they want that buzz bait as slow as you can possibly get it. Other times they want you to burn it. So you just kind of have to figure out, hey, am I really having to move this bait quickly at all times, or am I having to slow roll this bait, or am I just picking up slack line? If you're going out dragging, say, a Carolina rig on the bottom, you're not moving that bait with the reel. You're moving it with the rod. So gear ratio doesn't matter. So to me, I'm going to pick a little bit higher gear ratio just so I can pick up line. Same thing with a jerkbait. You're not using the reel to impede action on that bait. So to me, I'm going to go ahead and get a little bit faster gear ratio just so I can pick up line quicker. So that's what you kind of have to look for. Are you moving the bait with the rod, or are you moving the bait with the reel? Crankbaits, chatterbaits, you're moving those with the reel, so the gear ratio matters more. If you're dragging a worm on the bottom, gear ratio doesn't matter at that point. Go ahead and get a faster gear ratio so that you don't have to worry about that fish eating it and then coming towards you and putting a lot of slack in the line. Again, I know that all these gear ratios and techniques can be confusing, but go and get you know, most of the guys now are going to have 3 different gear ratio reels. And what I would tell you to do is figure out how you're moving that bait. Are they wanting it fast? Are they wanting it slow? Are you using the rod to move the bait? And then select the appropriate gear ratio reel for that given day and given technique. I hope this video helps. Please drop a comment down below. Any other videos that I need to do involving reels, gear ratios, line, anything like that. Go like and subscribe, and I hope to see you guys on the next one. Thank you.